spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David E.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Well, good morning, Hawaii. Thanks so much for tuning in here on this Monday morning, the first Monday of April. I'm Ryan Kalei Suji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. And this morning, Yanji, we are focusing on some of the issues going on at the surrounding Native Hawaiian homes, as well as land that has been promised to Native Hawaiians that continue to wait for their opportunity.
Yeah, right now the legislature is pondering a bill that could infuse DHHL with $600 million. It would be a huge, huge infusion of cash that could change a lot of lives. We're going to be talking this morning with Tyler Iokepa Gomes, who is the Deputy Director of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Tyler, thanks for being here.
Morning. Thank you for having me again.
So let's talk about this legislation. $600 million is certainly a lot of money. Where does the legislation stand right now? And let's talk about the impact that money could make.
Right now, we're looking at the bill is currently pending a hearing before WHAM in the Senate. And then if all goes well and the senators are able to decide on a final version of that bill, it'll go back to the House and then eventually to conference and hopefully onto the governor. As far as what this bill could mean for the department, it's monumental. The state has never given this magnitude of funds to the department previously to this. The only time the department received that money was a $600 million settlement for a number of wrongs committed against the trust back in the 90s. So this is the first time that we've seen this really game-changing commitment from the legislature.
When that announcement was made, during the opening of the session, it was sort of the marquee legislation that the lawmakers were really going to push this session and was touted as one of the top priorities by the leadership. Was this at all a surprise to you folks there? Had you known that this was going to be something that they were going to focus on prior to the session, or were you made aware of it sort of in this opening day, on that opening day?
I think we were aware that there was an interest in supporting the department. We certainly weren't prepared for the level at which it came out at. So it was a little bit of surprise, but definitely there's a whole lot of gratitude here at the department for the fact that we think that the legislature heard the call that we put out, particularly last year, in trying to explain the really vast need that the department has.
Let's talk about that need. More than 28,000 people, beneficiaries waiting for homes, that list, or for lots and for other benefits. What could that $600 million do in terms of bringing down the list? Where would you put that money, and what kind of an impact could it make for those 28,000 people?
Using rough numbers from our prior developments, we were able to calculate that with $600 million, and this is sort of looking at the way the Senate bill is framed, we could probably deliver close to 3,000 new units. On the House's proposal, we'd be able to impact closer to 4,000, 5,000 potential beneficiaries, depending on how that money is laid out in terms of what we can use it for. But in all, I think considering how expensive development is and how few homes we are actually able to move on a year-to-year basis, even 3,000 is something unprecedented. So it would mean a significant chunk of the waitlist could be addressed.
And what would that process look like with the construction phase? Because it's one thing, of course, to get the money and the funds to commit to build those 3,000 new homes, but it would also take some time to, of course, go through that process. And then the construction phase overall, what would that timeline also look like?
We were asked to look at projects that could have heads in beds, for lack of a better phrase, in the next 6 to 7 years. So those projects we would expect to begin as rapidly as possible, and we hope to have some of the first heads in beds in, say, 5-6 years, with the longer projecting out just a little bit past that, but easily within the decade, I think.
Now, recently your agency did a survey. Can you tell us about that? Rather than giving folks lots or lands, there is an idea of perhaps helping people with a down payment for property outside of land within the department. Tell us about that survey and what you're hearing from respondents.
Sure. So both the Senate and the House bills focus on providing funds, like you mentioned, Angie, to do basically down payment assistance. So helping those on the wait list purchase fee simple land off of Hawaiian homelands. And one of the questions that came in from the legislature is, one, would there even be a demand for a program like that? And two, would beneficiaries be willing to remove their names from the wait list in exchange for $100,000 step up in their down payment? So we produced a survey. About 45% of the respondents said that they'd be willing to do so. The survey really wasn't there to determine whether or not it was universally popular, but more so to see whether or not there would be enough waitlisters interested. Obviously, with the funds that are coming in, we probably won't be able to provide down payment to 45% of the waitlist, but at least we know the demand is there. One of the problems or the challenges lately has been this sort of characterization that it's a buy-off. And I think it's better framed as a buyback, because if the purpose of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act is to rehabilitate Native Hawaiians, and that's best achieved by putting them back on the land, then empowering those Native Hawaiians who actually have the capacity to buy fee simple property and do so without the strings of these 99-year leases, really that is an act of rehabilitation in and of itself. And I think it sends a strong message that Native Hawaiians have a place in terms of home ownership in Hawaii, and those options are made available. More than that, if we can get those individuals off of the wait list, that's that many more individuals down the wait list we can serve. And so I think this goes to the larger conversation that housing and housing needs are really on a broad spectrum. There are those who are very nearly ready to purchase a home, and we hope to target them. And by putting that focus there, now our traditional projects that are ongoing can better serve those who really aren't ready to purchase in the fee simple world.
And for those who may be interested in that route and going that way, would there be any stipulations or clauses that would state what that, say, 100,000 would be used for? Could it only be used for housing? Could it be used for rental assistance? I mean, what would be the parameters of that payment?
So that's going to be up to the legislature. I think what it looks like right now is either down payment assistance or mortgage assistance, which I think was laid out in the Senate version of the bill. I think there were some individuals who indicated in the survey that they would be willing to take the $100,000, apply it to their existing mortgage, and they would be willing to take their names off the wait list for that. But that speaks to the fact that we know from a 2020 survey that 50% of the wait list are already homeowners. We also know that 30%, maybe close to 10,000 people on the wait list make 100% or greater of the area median income. And so there are people who really have capacity that we can serve in a more efficient way that allows us to target our resources that are in higher demand for those who aren't at that level yet.
There's a question here from Joe. He says there's tons of lots available on the Big Island. Why don't they buy them up? Is the question, is the resource issue that you face an issue of land? Is it an issue of infrastructure? Where is the biggest need from your view?
That's a tough one because they're all really big needs. For example, Oahu has the longest residential wait list. We have the least available residential land on Oahu. So I'd say here, the greatest need is land. But beyond that, infrastructure is a massive need. It's costly. We've seen in the last 2 years of the pandemic, the cost of construction rapidly increasing. And so those things sort of make it far more challenging to do a lot of this in a reasonable amount of time. That said, to answer the question, we could use funds to acquire land. That depends on what the legislature restricts us to using the money for. Right now, it doesn't look like land acquisition is a part of that priority, but that doesn't mean we can't seek out additional funds in future legislative sessions to, acquire more property.
If we can take a step back and look at the broader picture of how this is all framed when someone is on the list, can you explain how that list is prioritized? If it's just based on overall their length of time they've been on this wait list with their family members, if you can talk through how maybe some of those individuals who may benefit from this, how will they be selected?
So, excuse me. So we're 100 years old. This is we're running on the end of our 100th anniversary, which means the waitlist has taken on a few different looks in the last 100 years. What it is presently is basically the amount of time you spent on the waitlist. There are carryovers from the older versions of the waitlist, which were island-specific or area-specific. Now it's basically island-specific and the date and timestamp of when you applied. But as far as how individuals could benefit from the program, with the case of down payment or mortgage assistance, really we likely consider, and I don't want to cement anything in stone because we haven't received the full set of instructions and limitations from the legislature, but we'd probably open the program up to interested applicants, and then we'd look at their spot on the waitlist to prioritize them. Obviously, we have a challenge with many folks who have been on the waitlist for a long period of time. We'd like to be able to target as many of those as possible.
You did mention off the top that this money could help between 3,000 to 5,000 folks on the wait list, depending on how the legislature structures how the money can be spent. What is the current, year-to-year wait list? Sort of how many people are you able to move off on a yearly basis, just by comparison to sort of show the impact of that 3,000 number?
Yeah, I think it's easier looking at our 5-year output. Our 5-year output is about 1,500 units. So, I mean, we're talking over double the amount of units in our traditional 5-year pipeline. So that would be a huge step forward in terms of, our current track record.
And if we look at other options, if obviously there are those individuals who are seeking homes on this Hawaiian homelands, but you guys are looking into other alternative means of providing housing and in form of affordable rentals, or in affordable apartments or other sources. Can you explain a little bit more about other diversification of these housing options?
Sure. I think people are very familiar with our turnkey products, which are the homes that come built, and basically you mortgage the construction of the home and you move in. We also offer vacant lots. So those families who can't finance a traditional turnkey home, they have the opportunity to take improved land and build to code something that fits their need, their size, their family. We've done rent with option to purchase. Most recently in Kona, which is basically for the first 15 years, the individual rents, and then they're able to mortgage the remainder after 15 years, which sets them up for stronger financial stability. And then, like you just mentioned, Ryan, we are very close to kicking off a project in Mo'iliili, which is affordable rentals in the form of condominium. Condominiums have been a little bit of a challenge because in order for it to be a lease under the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, it must be issued for 99 years. We can't yet guarantee that condominiums will last for 99 years. And so that's why we are choosing to do rentals in the condominium projects. But Mo'iliili's project, which is on the site of the former Bolodrome, will be our first foray into density, particularly in the town area, which is, very desired, at least for the island of Oahu.
There's another piece of land that's, that could be a similar project. That, of course, is the parcel near Kapiolani Community College, right by Diamond Head Theater. For folks who aren't familiar, there is House Bill 228, or 2288 rather, which would transfer that land from the university to your agency. Can you tell us a little bit about where that stands, not necessarily in the legislative process, but what you would do, what your agency would do with that land if it was able to acquire it?
We'd have to start with a little bit of investigation. We'd have to have some studies done through our planning department or planning division, just to make sure we know the full realm of, challenges we might face. And so I think that is a part of a bigger problem, and what people don't see when they think about, well, what does Hawaiian Homelands do? Just build the homes. When we look at parcels, we have to consider not only what we're going to build on them, we also have to consider their impact to the surrounding communities and the surrounding infrastructure. We need to think about things like traffic in the area. We're going to be increasing potentially density based on the size of that parcel. We'd probably have to go up, so we'd have to think about impact to community congestion. We have to make sure that we're not overly burdening existing infrastructure resources in that neighborhood, particularly water and sewer. So that might require build out of additional water and sewer resources. We have to make sure that there's no soil issues or cultural issues. And so there's a wide range of considerations the department has to give to any raw parcel. But because this one is not in our inventory presently, it'll probably take a little longer to kick off because we've not yet had an opportunity to really investigate what that universe looks like. But what could end up on it someday, just given that the smaller size of that parcel, like I said, we'd probably have to take it up. I don't know right now how tall it'd be, how many units we could put there, but we do know that there is a demand for housing in town. And so there's certainly a subsection of the waitlist who'd be very interested in that kind of option.
If you can expand a little more on the Mo'ili'ili project, I mean, how many units are you looking at with that project? And for those individuals that do decide that that is the route that they want to take and move maybe into that facility, what do they essentially come off that waiting list and that just becomes their unit? If you can explain a little more about the project as a whole too.
Sure. In the case of whether or not they come off the wait list, unfortunately, no. In order to come off of the wait list, it needs to be a lease, which is sort of this like legal tango, right? But because we're just not confident doing a 99-year lease in the building, they'll remain in their spot on the wait list. But this really allows the department to serve their other needs in the meantime before they are eventually offered a spot. So they wouldn't come off of the wait list. And I'm sorry, Ryan, the first part of the question I totally just blanked on. But
just the total number of units and what you're looking at size-wise with the scope of the project.
Yeah, it'll be something over 250. It won't quite be 300 units. And it'll be a mix. I believe there's commercial on the bottom floor with residential on the top. So, a substantial parcel. We also have a parcel across the street, which we're able to purchase thanks to the legislature and in partnership with Kamehameha Schools, which are currently low-rise buildings. If the Bolajong project is successful, there's always the possibility of contemplating uses for that parcel as well. So, we've got the projects that are in the pipeline now, but we're also looking forward to how can we expand on this.
I want to go back to that $600 million and thinking about the impact not only to the Native Hawaiian community, but also just to Hawaii as a whole. We know that housing is a challenge for everyone. And if there are 3,000 more units in any sort of neighborhood or for anyone else, that then does have an impact on other folks who are looking for housing. Can you talk about the impact? The impact to families who are on the list is very obvious, but talk about what you think the broader impact could be for the rest of the community.
I think from a cultural perspective, right? Hawaii just wouldn't exist without Native Hawaiians and their ability to live here and thrive here. And so I just think from a very fundamental level, making sure that there is space in our communities for Native Hawaiians. If they want to live here, they have the option to live here. That's critical because Native Hawaiians, and there are non-Native Hawaiians who fall in this category too, but Native Hawaiians sort of carry the responsibility of preserving the names and the identity of the places that we live. And so I think from a cultural perspective, it's incredibly important. But also, if we can take someone who might potentially, let's say, be in an affordable rental now that is not DHHL's, and we can provide them a unit on DHHL land in one of these 3,000, that frees that unit up, hopefully, to another local family who might not be either 50% Native Hawaiian, or they just might not be Hawaiian at all, but that might open that unit up for them. And so just like you said, Yanji, creating more inventory could potentially benefit everyone as we sort of shift around and get people into more permanent housing.
We know that the legislative process can be a tricky one at times, and there are times where we think and we see a bill going through the process that this is a slam dunk and everyone's supportive, and then we see strange things happening in the final weeks with conferencing and things happening in the last minute that alters the entire makeup of a bill. Through this process thus far, with the legislature on both sides, with the House and the Senate versions, how confident are you that this is moving through? And what has the involvement been of your department with these lawmakers? Are you involved in talks with them on the different versions? And how much are they seeking your feedback on this?
That's you put me on the spot on that one. I hesitate to say how confident I am about it, but I am very hopeful. I think the response overall has been positive, and if we can glean anything from the response, then I'm hopeful that it'll move forward. As far as the department's involvement, we've been very involved. There's been a number of requests for information, both from the Senate and the House, in terms of what are you currently doing? What are you projecting out? Can you spend this money? And so we've attempted to provide answers and data for as much as we can, so that the legislators can make as informed of a decision that they can, and hopefully as well-rounded a bill that impacts the department in the right way and doesn't make it difficult for the department to deliver on that promise.
I'm interested also in what kind of opposition you've heard toward this measure and what kind of sort of speed bumps you're anticipating in these final weeks.
I'd say the majority of the opposition comes from a place of not all of the information having been available, from the upfront. And so we've received a lot of folks just asking more out of curiosity than opposition, why are you trying to buy people off of the wait list? And like I mentioned, I think explaining to them that really this is enabling and empowering Native Hawaiians to buy back land, right? Increase Native Hawaiian holdings at large in the state. I think that sort of resonates with people. So I think the most opposition was without context. That survey, we were on a tight time crunch in getting that out. We could have done the survey a little bit better. We could have messaged it a little stronger. But I'd say given the opportunity to explain all the potential uses, and really that this is out of the department's hands and this is in the hands of the legislature, I think that helps calm some of the fears that many of our beneficiaries have in terms of how are you going to use this money? How is it going to benefit us? And how long is it going to take you to do that? So,
this would, as you mentioned, be a landmark bill that went through and significantly impact the department as a whole. But there is a future as well. There will be other people who will still be on the list. There will be people that'll be added to the list after this. And some say that this is sort of a Band-Aid on a much larger issue of how do you take care of this issue long term with the demand that will only continue. And that list there will still be others on that list. How do you address those concerns of this long term issue and how maybe the state could provide? Obviously they're not going to be able to provide this funding each and every session. But what do you believe would be a long-term solution to helping to get this list down even further?
You're right. It's not a panacea. It's not a silver bullet. 600 million is a fraction of what we believe the department's need is. Last year, when we talked about gaming in Hawaii, we estimated that the department's need to develop for everyone on the wait list is closer to $6.5 billion. And so 600 million, while incredibly impactful, obviously is a small amount in comparison to what the department needs. And, that's not the fault of, the legislature today, right? That is the fault of 100 years of sort of figuring out how to navigate this program and develop it. And in the earliest years through, the 70s, the 80s, the department really did not receive a significant amount of funding that carried on at times through the 2000s. And so you have these small incremental hardships against the department adding up to a very large problem now. And so I just want to be clear that, one, this is not, the solution to end it all, but also it's not the fault of today's legislature that, this problem is at the scale that it is. As far as what we can do, like I talked about last year at gaming, we have to be aggressive in terms of considering how best to generate revenue. I think there's a message there for the state as a whole, but the department also has to be really mindful about revenue generation. If not gaming, we've got to do it somehow. And so, my hope is that future administrations at DHHL, that is a priority, is figuring out how to generate more funds, because we may not always have the friendly generosity of today's legislature in the future. There may come another time where the legislature feels like it's not a priority to fund you right now. And in those times, the department will absolutely need to be prepared for those kinds of rainy days.
We are almost out of time, but I do want to give you an opportunity for a final word, specifically to lawmakers who may be considering this. What is the reason that you think the best sort of pitch, if you will, for this legislation? Why is it so necessary now? And what's your message to them as they make these considerations?
Yeah, I think in contemplation of amount of money this historic, we need to take a look at, how can we best impact the Native Hawaiian people? And so whether that's building, 3,000 plus new units, or whether that's providing waitlisters the opportunity to achieve home ownership off of Hawaiian homelands, all of those things help fulfill the vision of Prince Kuhio. And I think, us being 100 years into the program, we should be very proud of everything the department has accomplished with the little that it's been provided in the last 100 years. And that something as historic as this 600 million really would be meaningful in a way that the department has not experienced in its 100-year history.
Okay, Tyler Gomes, thank you so much for joining us this morning and sharing your insights as well as the update on what's happening there with your department. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Aloha.
Aloha. Well, great to hear from him. And really, when he put that into context, the idea that their 5-year plan typically yields 1,500 beneficiaries getting into homes in 5 years, he says that this one-time cash infusion could impact anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 beneficiaries, depending, of course, on what kind of strings the legislature puts to this money if it does, in fact, pass the bill. He talked about they could make it strictly for home ownership and just turning over keys, if you will, and that would bring the lower end, the 3,000. But there also is this idea that he talked about that in that survey to beneficiaries of perhaps giving them a one-time $100,000 cash payment that they could use then for either mortgage, to pay their mortgage on existing ownership or toward a down payment. He did acknowledge that some in the community see that as a buy-off, but he really reframed that and saying that this allows Native Hawaiians to buy lands outside of DHHL's purview, and there is no 99-year lease attached to it. So in essence, they could almost keep it longer.
Yeah, he called it a buyback in the reframing of that offered opportunity. And with that survey, about 40% said that they would be interested. He also noted, the amount of people that are currently on the wait list that already have homes that they own. And so this may be an opportunity to help pay down some of those mortgages or an opportunity, of course, to, invest in other areas. And so they will be exploring that and seeing what happens. Right now, the bill seems to be moving through the legislature. Of course, there will be that hearing at the Ways and Means Committee that will further examine this. But this is something that, of course, was a headline coming out of the opening day of the legislature when those in the leadership decided to make this announcement of this $600 million commitment to the department and really putting a lot of investment into just this, how things proceed overall.
Right. And this is an area that people have talked about for decades, the growing number of beneficiaries on the list and slowly chipping away at it. But as he said there, some legislatures are more friendly than others. And now this could be a real game changer for the agency and really uplift a lot of people and have a impact beyond the Native Hawaiian community, talking about the importance, of course, of keeping Native Hawaiians in Hawaii and giving them an opportunity to own land, and also just adding more housing inventory. No matter who you talk to, any politician, they all say their number one issue is affordable housing. And of course, this would make a big impact on both Native Hawaiians and non-Native Hawaiians alike.
Yeah, and we'll be talking a little more about this bill specifically with our guests on Wednesday. We're going to be joined by the heads of the sort of budget bill, if you will, and those who oversee the purse strings of the state. Of course, that is Representative Sylvia Luke, as well as Senator Donovan Dela Cruz, the chairs of the Finance and Ways and Means Committee. We'll be talking to them specifically about this bill, their thoughts about how this moves forward, but also about some of the other measures that are presented in front of them in terms of how the overall state budget looks. Some of the incentives that the governor had also wished would move forward has since died, but their thoughts about how they want to get money back into the overall economy and into the hands of those residents in Hawaii, and getting an update on a number of key specific projects such as Aloha Stadium. All of that goes through these two committees, and so there will be a lot to talk about on Wednesday.
Absolutely. And then on Friday, HART Board Chair Colleen Hanabusa will join us. She'll, of course, be talking about the rail project, reacting to the mayor's proposal to end it in Kaka'ako, at least for now, and not going all the way to Ala Moana. Her thoughts on whether the FTA is going to allow that adaptation to the plan. So plenty to talk about this week, a lot of heady stuff, and we are looking forward to that conversation first on Wednesday and then on Friday, both times, of course, at 10:30. So we'll see you right back here then.
Aloha. We'll see you then.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.